All right, welcome in. Today, I have another guest coach with me, Stephen Davis of Davis Fitness Method in Seattle, Washington. Actual Seattle, we talked about before we hopped on, not the Seattle burbs that I feel like everybody that I know out there is, but like in the heart of Seattle. Like you have, it's such a cool vibe to your gym too. It's like purple lights and it's like a club, basically. Is that the
Right.
vibe that you went with?
Yeah. Well, I don't know how it even happened, dude. It's kind of by accident, honestly.
Yeah.
If you scroll through my Instagram enough, you'll see that there's just like at one point it's like weird fluorescent lighting, and then there was like a random strip of neon light, and then it just kind of like took over.
Yeah, you're just like, let's steer into this, it's the
Yeah.
vibe of the spot. And so Steven and I met at an event in Seattle a little over a year ago now, where I met a few of the other guests on this podcast when I flew out there. I was the one from the furthest away besides um oh gosh, who came from Florida? But like everybody was from the Seattle area, it felt like, and then there was like me from New Hampshire, a couple people from New York and Chicago, one person from Florida, but most of you guys were from that area, and it was really cool, the community of coaches that you guys kind of have over in that neck of the woods. I feel like it's a little bit of a hub of elite coaches for that area. So, what as you started out and kind of went off on your own, what what prompted you to want to kind of start your own gym? Because that's not a small endeavor for coaches to be like, I'm gonna literally have a brick and mortar facility. um, and why did you decide to go that direction?
Um. Well, I guess a little backstory is that I feel like maybe I don't feel like I'm the only one, but a lot of trainers when they first get started, it's like that's their dream. They like
Hmm.
I'm gonna start out at this level, and then I'm gonna work my way up, and I'm gonna own my gym. Well, as I um, grew up, I was like, didn't even think it was possible anymore. I was like, I'm just gonna train, and I really enjoyed training, and I really leaned into that. And honestly, it was just more that opportunities kind of fell into my lap,
Hmm.
and I kind of just jumped at them. So I was training out of a gym. I was doing one-to-one personal training, and I was like 6 a.m. to 7 or 8 p.m. like booked minus like lunchtime, and so I'm just like working, 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 and I was like, how can I make this same impact and income and work less? And so that kind of shifted into semi-private coaching, and then once I did um, semi-private coaching, then it kind of made it impossible for me to kind of downsize.
Yeah.
And then COVID hit, which in Seattle there's lots of restrictions surrounding capacity of buildings, and being that I have so many people, gyms don't really like you having that many people in them when there's capacity restrictions. So that ended up being I needed to have my own space, and so it just became out of a necessity that I had my own space.
Hmm.
Um, and then it's kind of like, oh, it was half a dream of mine, but also like I couldn't do what I wanted to do at other spaces. It just wasn't working out logistically anymore, and so I had to make my own space.
Yeah. Well, and then you get to do it kind of the way that you want to do it without having to do it. So as you think, because I think semi-private's a really highly underrated model for people. And I think that there are benefits almost to, as somebody who, I think you and I both have trained on the gym floor, right? Like I prefer coaching semi-private, and I think that clients often get better results semi-private. I don't know what's your experience been with that. Is that still kind of mostly what you do? Do you have much one-on-one stuff or?
Yeah, I do both one to one and semi private. I'd say they're different, but and I'd say like uh, private tends to be for a very specific individual, whereas like semi private, most people probably should land like most people and beginners should land in a semi private so long as the coach is capable of bouncing around and not getting distracted and stuff
Yeah.
like that. So, but yeah, no, I think there's a number of benefits from the semi-private side of things. Like seeing how other people are doing things. You get more touch points on the same amount of time. So like where a coach would work with you on what you're working on and touching on those things, you also get to see a coach work with somebody else on a different move and how they're adjusting them. And then they ask questions. And so more of these things kind of pop up. So you kind of have more, I guess, opportunities to learn in a single session versus just zeroing in on what it is that we're working on in your program. You're like, oh, I see so and so's doing this. Why are they doing that? And I'm doing this. So it just inspires more questions. That, and they see like, oh, like that's what effort looks like, or that's what lack of effort looks like. So like different
Yeah,
things like that.
for sure. And I think there's something to I think the camaraderie. So thinking about back to that event, and I'm sure you've done more, but like I don't often get to work out with other people, much less other coaches anymore. I
Yeah.
don't know, but like it's an interesting thing. I think you become a coach, and people are like, "Oh, you become a if you like to work out, you should become a trainer." And it's like, no, like your workouts get the bottom of the totem pole when you're working out. You're training clients. Like you work out at the least convenient times, and you often get to do it by yourself. Like that's what happens. But when we did this workout together we started at like 8 p.m. and it was 8 Pacific time, which for me was like 11 p.m. And full day, like we were 12 hours into the day on like 900 milligrams of caffeine and no food. Like we had this like little catered lunch, which was delicious, but not enough food for most of
Yeah.
us in that room. And
A little too
we
macro
still were,
friendly.
yeah, it was macro friendly, but it wasn't quite enough
Yeah.
calories
Yeah.
for you're even bigger than me, and I'm not a big guy, but you're taller and stronger than I am, and we're in there, we were moving weight, man. Like we were lifting real stuff, and it wasn't
Mm,
wasn't a small workout. And I think there's something to like if you had asked me at that time to go back to the hotel and do a workout, it would have been vastly different,
yeah.
a vastly different experience. So I wonder if you could talk about the aspects of kind of community on your like within your gym and the community within the semi-privates and just in general, and how that's kind of grown or impacted you've seen in clients, because I think that's a really interesting component to semi-private as well.
Yeah. It actually is kind of interesting because especially when you have people at varying skill or strength levels. Like one of my clients, he's like probably just one of the stronger dudes if you go into any gym.
Hmm.
Um, and he works out here, and like clients will be like, "Oh, his arms are as big as my legs." And so like when he's there, it's like he's not trying to make people work harder. He's just working hard, and then other people are like, "Well, let me do that too." Like it's like so they're like
Yeah.
kind of like, "Oh, that's what it takes." So I mean that's cool. And then like you just have some people that just like always come in and are ready to crush it, and then some people come in and it's like haven't had their coffee. It's 7 in the morning, and they're trying to train. They're doing their best. They're there, but everybody kind of warms up to the what is at least I would say the medium temperature of the room. So like somebody comes
Hmm.
in, they're like super sleepy, and somebody comes in and they're like pretty high energy. These people probably don't do a ton of connecting early on, but like
Hmm.
as they get through the workout, like this one will come up a bit, and then this is um, more like not feasible, but there's a better connection there as that person starts to warm up. It's also kind of nice because people just have like different interests. So like I'll be walking around the room to different people, and it's like, oh, these people start talking about they're into baking and stuff. So all of a sudden
Hmm.
we're having a conversation over here about baking, and you move all the way to the other side of the room, and they're talking about you know something that happened like on the news or something, and they're cracking jokes. So it's kind of fun just to see like everything kind of bubble, and I don't know, man. It's like I just like look at it as like a human petri dish.
Yeah.
It's just like you drop like I don't know, like you in science class you had like a
Yeah.
little thing, you drop something in and it just like changes everything. And that's a
Mm.
person. Like every time you do that little drop is the person, and every person that you drop in there changes the whole thing. But it's
Yeah.
like a beautiful little concoction.
It's so wild. Yeah. in I think that it's I don't know if you ever would get that group of people together outside of that,
outside.
you know.
Yeah,
And but like relationships within those people are like you probably see these people that you go to the work out with, you know, 2 3 times a week. You see them more frequently than you see your family or a lot of people. Like
yep,
these are, you know, I've seen the small group that I've coached for 5 years at 6 a.m. twice a week. Like I've seen some of these people twice a week for 5 years. There's nobody else besides my wife that I've seen with that frequency, and my kids.
right,
Maybe my mother-in-law, and my mom, you know, because they live close. But like, I don't see my brother that much. I see my
right,
brother, you know, 5 6 times a year. So that
right,
level of connection is a little bit of like, oh, like real relationships can get formed here, um,
right.
which is pretty wild.
How do you feel about that?
Like the relationships that get formed,
Hmm. Yeah.
I think it's one of the more unique things because of the different walks of life. So like one of my favorite clients, I mean I love all my clients, but he's just like one of the best personalities. Like you talk about the guy who like raises the temperature of the room. You know, his name's Chris, and he's since COVID, like since July of 2020 when we could come back to working out, he's been training with he and his wife have been training with me. And he's like 60 years old. He's run the New Hampshire Department of Transportation. He was like vice president of the University of New Hampshire for a little bit. Right now, he's the president of a big company. So, like, super successful dude. And he's in there, and I got like a 25-year-old girl who, you know, woman who's just like kind of coming into her own in adulthood a little bit. And the two of them have like over the course of the last 2 years like become friends, and they'll just like throw stuff at each other in the middle of their workouts, you know, like they'll walk
Yeah.
by and she'll just like hit him in the head. And I'm like, what a wild thing. Like the two of you
Yeah.
would never have met each other and would never have done it. And I don't know if that's a universal thing, but I think that those relationships just form over time. The two people who you never see, and certainly I've seen how they've encouraged each other in the gym, but also just in general. Like she's gotten promoted. I don't, you know, I'm not going to say Chris did it, you know, but this girl has grown both in the gym and outside of the gym. And I think part of it is like, hey, who are you a part of? You know, like the raising of the, hey, I'm surrounded by, you know, if people are coming to work out at 6 a.m., they're, you know, it's a certain kind of person, you know,
Mhm.
and oftentimes you get a certain kind of person in there who are like, hey, we're raising the bar a little bit, and it's pretty cool.
What is it like for you to be surrounded by people like that?
That's another thing. Like you don't often like for me, I get to pick his brain. You know, I'm like, this is a dude who's just like, you know, he's raised 3 kids. He's, you know, I don't know how much money this guy's made, but like wicked successful in so many areas of life. Like has been married to his high school sweetheart for 30 years, 35 years. And just to be like, what do you think about life, Chris? You know, and for him to be like, hey Jeff, how you doing? How are the kids? Like the fact that I get to be around that is a pretty cool thing on a regular basis. I don't know. How about you? Like, I'm sure in Seattle too. Like, it's a pretty big hub. You know, you get probably quite the spectrum of people in there.
For sure. Yeah. Everybody's different. I think the main thing is like just kind of for me, it's always been about like seeing, how these people tick, not necessarily like trying to pick their brains to,
Mm,
find a gold nugget or anything like that. I'm just like very curious to see like how these people operate and, what their
mm,
values are. And, my, my whole thing is like, I'm approaching this from like both, like, I think it's Luca Hocevar who said like it's not just business, it's personal.
yeah.
But so like part of my coaching is like really focusing in on like what
Hmm.
matters to this person. And so and then that allows me to be like, okay, like do we really need to push this thing today? Like is or is it like I know that you have other things going on this weekend. I know that you have other things that are important to you. So we'll focus on those things. Be it like I had like one lady who came in, she's like a flamingo dance teacher. And so like she doesn't want to be crushed after a workout and like
No.
the typical trainer memed like punished sort of deal. But and I think that's the thing that is interesting when it comes to training is that there's this memeified version of what training is, and then I think
Yeah.
there's like what an actual coach does, and they're two
Yep.
different things. Don't get me wrong, like there are coaches out there that the meme is there for a reason
Mm-hmm.
because that tends to be like how a lot of coaches coach, but it's not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily like what we're out here doing. But yeah, definitely lots of different kinds of people, lots of different interests, varying levels of career. But most people out here are like in tech.
Yeah.
So as different as they are, they're like all in tech. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think that you hit on something that's really interesting, and I don't want to like necessarily do a soliloquy on the state of the industry sort of thing, but we can. I think that there's an interesting component to this, which is the idea of like, hey, it's a personal thing, and like what I think a good question is like, what makes a good coach? I think as somebody who is a good coach, I think that you can qualify things that do make a good coach, and you hit on one of them, which is like understanding your clientele. So like I'll use Chris as an example, right? Chris is late 50s, early 60s. I don't remember exactly how old he is, right? Executive. Chris is not competing in Mr. Olympia, and he's also not competing in strongman competitions. So if Chris doesn't go up in weight this week, that's okay. You know what I mean? Like Chris is just looking to, feel good and not be in pain and be fit and, extend his life. He's not looking to set any world records. And so I'm not out here being like, Chris, sometimes I will, but generally he's going to know what's going on, and so, but I can understand what makes him tick and what's going on. And that sort of component is if you understand why people are there and what they're doing, that makes a big difference in what you're doing versus the giant dude. I don't know if you said his name, the biggest dude in the gym whose arms are as big as everybody's legs, right? That guy probably wants to push himself. He's a little bit of a dude who's like, if you don't tell me that I suck once a day, I'm not going to be able to lift as much. Like you got, there's a different type of person. So as I guess what do you feel like as among that, but also in general, what are other things as somebody who's I think this is an interesting way to do it. If somebody's like, hey, I want to find a coach, what are we looking for? Hey, I think most people find their way into semi-private, but like what qualifies as like, all right, this is a good thing? Because I think you and I both probably have clients who are like have had bad experiences, and we get the memeified version of it, and then people are like,
Yeah.
I don't want to do it because I've only ever had a coach who wouldn't quit until I was buried on the floor in a puddle of sweat and tears.
Right. I think the internet has made people very good at utilizing buzzwords that clients are shopping for. So even when you are shopping for it and you hear the right words, it doesn't necessarily mean that that person knows what the hell they're talking about. Um, so, you know, if you're going to go look for somebody, what are the qualities that you want in that person? Or are you asking if you're going to go look for somebody, what are things to like look for specifically? Or,
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you were talking about like if let's just say that one of your clients was
mm-hmm,
moving, he was moving
yeah,
to Texas,
mm-hmm,
and you're like, I'm going to set you up with a coach. You know what I mean?
right,
And let's say you don't know anybody in that town, right?
right,
You and I'm sure you've done this, right? I do this all the
yeah,
time. I go on I Google gyms trainers in this town, and I start looking around, and I'm like, hey, don't go here. Like
yeah,
this is not the right fit versus go here. And
yeah,
and so what are maybe the red flags, or for somebody else as they come in and maybe understanding like, hey, you can't know until you're in there. a little bit,
Yeah.
but like what are some things to be like, hey, this is a good sign, like this is a green flag and this is a red flag if you're thinking about trying to find a coach who's going to help you with this. Because you're
Yeah.
right, the marketing is not necessarily indicative of whether or not they're going to be a good coach. You're going to be a
Yeah.
great
I think
marketer but a bad coach.
you knowing what you want is really important. So I think if you're as a coach looking for your client to find a trainer, like knowing the vibe that fits them, and I'm not like, you know, if you look at something and it's like it's a training dungeon and you've got like a mom of three who's like, not really into that, then maybe
Yeah.
don't send her there. So like, it's like if you know that there's a certain type of training that they would, more or less gravitate towards, maybe if it's not 100% your style, or maybe it's not 100% the way that you do things, well, chances are that anybody does 100% the thing that you do is going to be very slim.
Yeah.
I will tend to try to lean towards like there are certifications that I've completed, and I'll look at the network there
Mm-hmm.
first. So like, the Facebook posts and stuff like that, like from like PPSC or some guys from FRC, some CPPS, but I really like Prescript, my
Mm-hmm.
favorite. So if you're shopping around, that'd be like one of the first things I'm kind of looking for. But outside of that, like, what's this going to be like for this person? Because it's like they're going to have to do it, 3 times a week, whereas you're just kind of like
Yeah.
going out there. So seeing that their what is their philosophy on training, and then I think if they have a concise answer, it's like they've kind of worked that out in their head. Whereas if they're kind of rambling, they like don't really know what their philosophy is. Like, oh, I haven't really thought about it. I just kind of like train each person as their own individual. It's like, yeah, but you have a philosophy surrounding that.
Mm.
So I mean, outside of that, like, what sort of references do they have?
Mm.
Do they have, general recommendations that are good testimonials?
Mm.
Those would be things I'm looking for, not just transformations, because
Mm.
there's before and the after, and then there's the after. So like if somebody's got a fuck ton of, transformation, sorry, not sure if
You're
you're
fine. Go ahead.
good. Okay. But yeah, if they don't have like somebody they've been working with for some length of time, like what's your longest client? I think that's a good question. Like, what's your longest client? And if
Yeah.
all of them are like 6 months, he's like, yeah, after 6 months they get the results and then they just, they're gone. It's like, I've done that. Like I've trained people that are like that. They've hit their goals and they don't necessarily have other things that they're looking to do, but they don't leave.
Yeah.
So I would say like, not that just because somebody had somebody for 15 years means that they were good with them,
Mm.
but I would say that that's probably a good sign.
Yeah. At
Is that
least of who they are as a person, you know.
right?
Thinking about the
And I think that
personal
that's
side of it.
I think that for coaching, that's first.
Oh, I
Sorry, yeah.
lost you for a second.
At least when it comes to coaching, I think that, yeah, like how somebody is as a person, that's first.
Mm.
It's like, be a good person and then be a good coach.
Yep.
Number
100%.
one, number two, 51-49.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, going back to what you said, and then I want to ask you this question because you brought it up. You kind of glanced on it. I think this would be a really interesting conversation. But the thing that I've said is the things that don't make you a good coach, right? Having a six pack, having a large Instagram following, you know, having great marketing materials and cool videos and all these things. Like, none of those necessarily make you a good coach. You can be a good coach with those things, but you don't necessarily have to have them. Like Luca has all of those things, and he's a great
Right,
coach. But
right,
you don't have to have. He was a great coach before he had all of those things, you know. But the things that make you a good client are the results you help your clients get, and the results you help your clients keep. Like, those are two things. Like, you can get the results you help your clients get, and the results you help your clients keep. Those are the two things. Because you can get clients results
right.
by doing extreme things that make people hate you, right? And I got a cool thumbs up, high five. But the flip side of it is, hey, do they keep um, those results? And that's what we're looking to do.
Right.
So, but you touched on this kind of briefly, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts. What is your training philosophy? Because I'm sure that you've spent time to think about it now. So,
Yeah, I tend to look at mine from like I borrow from the S&C world, where it's like each part of the season there's a different reason for training, and there might be a different adaptation or stimulus that we're looking for. So I tend to like to know what's going on with my clients at any particular given time. So like if somebody's coming in, it's summertime, they're outside more, they're doing more activities outside. So we know that input wise or output wise, there's a higher stimulus there. I want to know the types of activities that they're doing, and then what things can we match on the training side to make sure that they're able to still do those things and improve their performance in those things. On the other side of things, maybe they're really stressed from work. Maybe they're um, really like they're not getting as much sleep. Maybe diet's kind of taking a hit. Well, I want to look at things on that side as well. So how can I make training less taxing? Because they don't necessarily need something that's going to make them in a further sympathetic state. They need something that's going to help them maybe feel like they're probably coming in feeling really stiff already, stiff and tight already, and it's like, what can I do to make them feel light and bouncy? Like, and it's one of the questions I like to ask people at the beginning of a session is, how do you want to feel after today's session? Like, what is the feeling that you want to experience? Like, how would you know you had a successful session? And
mhm.
then my job as the coach is to deliver on that. And it's not just like, oh, here's the periodized plan and this is what we're going to do. Like, we did 5x3 last week, so we're going to go 4x3 this week, and we're going to push things. Like, it doesn't have to be that, right? So like, it's not just auto regulating. It's like, okay, like, how do we deliver what ultimately this client wants, like the long term goal, and what would make them feel like today is a good or successful session.
The seasonal aspect of life, I think, is super underrated when it comes to fitness and nutrition, because I think that there is the concept of in our heads of like, I push all the time, and that's part of, I think, the marketing is like, all in, pedal to the metal, and we're pushing it all the time. But the idea is like, life isn't really like that. Like, there are the natural ebbs and flows of life. Like, as we record this, it's the Friday before Memorial Day, right? And so there's, even within a week or a season, but like, we're entering summer season, which is a very different, especially for people who have kids, right? It's like a different animal. But for most people, it's, hey, we're outside more, we're doing more stuff, that sort of thing. The winter, like February, is like, I am just trying not to lose my mind in February. I'm constantly debating, do I just sell all of our possessions and move to the Caribbean? Like, this is miserable. So what is a reasonable expectation for that time? And I think where a lot of people have a hard time is the expectations of themselves, or the standard doesn't match the season that they're in. and
Mm-hmm.
but and then they feel like a failure, like
Mm-hmm.
the person coming in who's really stressed and was up all night, and what I mean, all of these things, and then they come into the gym and they just don't have it, and they get like kind of and the coach doesn't really know it, and they push them and they can't do it, and then they just feel like a failure. That's like further
Yeah.
negative
Yeah.
versus the other way. So as you think through those seasons, I mean, obviously there's the day to day, which I love that question. Like, hey, how do you want to feel on the heels of this? But how does that shift for you? Even maybe even within your own training, like, what are some of those times where you're like, hey, I'm gonna push, versus times where
Mm-hmm.
you're like, hey, I'm gonna throttle back a little bit?
Yeah. I'd say like, so there is like a listening to your body sort of thing, but I would say like the effort is always the standard, not the outcome.
Oh, that's well said.
So I can come in, feel like dog shit, and let's say what I normally am able to do I pick up 100 pounds less than that, and it's like, this is it.
Yeah.
I can give that thing 100% effort still though, right? Like
Hmm.
that was the limit, but that's the limit today. But there's not the limit on my effort, right? So I think that that's what auto regulating kind of is, or like rate of perceived exertion is supposed to be. It's not like you know 135 pounds on your bench press is always going to be RPE 8. Like
Hmm.
maybe one day you come in and you're like, whoa, this thing is flying. It's an RPE 6.
Hmm.
And next day you come in, it's RPE 10. It's like that can happen. And so I'd say like that's one way, like from the day to day, how I'd go about, you know, the standard for the training. And then, at different periods, like, in the winter, I know that, I'm not maybe going to be as active, and maybe I am like kind of losing it a little bit in the gym. So it's like maybe I want things that make me feel like, okay, like for some people, it's like maybe I want to be a little bit more ballistic. Like I want to feel something where I am trying to be a little bit explosive. Maybe that does mean to some degree I'm not going like super heavy on my power stuff. I can still keep in some stuff that helps with the joint health, because I don't want force and then more force and then more force. It's like, what can I do? Like if I'm already getting this stimulus, how do I get something that complements it on the other end? And then, maybe as I'm out and moving more, and I don't feel necessarily as stiff, maybe this is a good time for me to kind of push. Um, so I would say that again, it's like kind of based on the priorities of that specific client. But like from a training aspect, it's like, what adaptations are we looking for? And then like there might be times where it's like you double down on one adaptation, because that's the thing from the training. All right, so fat loss or muscle growth is an outcome. It's not a training adaptation necessarily. Like
Hmm.
the adaptation that we might be getting is strength, increased stamina, more speed, more power. These are adaptations from training. And so when people are like, I want to build muscle, or I want to, lose fat, those things can happen any way you train,
Yeah.
almost any way you train. So what are the other adaptations that we're looking for from strength and conditioning specifically? And
There's so much good there. So I want to say something from the beginning, because you said this really well, which is the effort is the standard. So I used to coach high school football, and I remember we had a nose all state nose tackle who was 360 pounds and just a behemoth, right? Just a mountain of a kid, and we're doing sprints, and you got this kid who would finish last in every single sprint that we did as a team, because he's moving the most. Like, dude is working, and but he would give maximum effort every time. And then you would have the skinny receivers who could kind of go at 75% effort, but just kind of be in the middle of the pack and kind of get lost. And I remember one coach called him out. His nickname was Taco, and which is the best nickname for a giant nose tackle. We're like, Taco is out here sprinting. I don't care that he's like, it's the effort is the standard. Like, sprinting is about effort, and if you're going to bring effort into this, like, you're not getting better if you're just kind of coasting. But today, whatever your effort is, like, the outcome is the outcome. But you're in charge of the process, like you talked about. Like, the outcome, you're not in charge of the outcome. You're in charge of the process and what you're putting into it. And some days, 135 pounds feels like 550 pounds, But where are we at with that? So how do you kind of go about shifting that mindset with your clients? Because I thought that was really well said. Of like, hey, no, 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 no. I know, like, because I think that early on, when you see somebody who starts to get progressive overload and they're like, I'm putting up more weight, and then they have the one day where they're like, I can't go up, and it feels like, oh no, I'm failing, like I'm not doing, you know what I mean? How do you kind of
mhm.
shift that mindset with them?
Yeah, I think that kind like So I get a little nerdy about some of it, probably all of it. But I'll go I'll go first. It's like, most of the adaptations that we're making are neuromuscular, right?
Yeah.
Like at least when it comes to strength. So like you can work with as little as 40% of your max when you're a beginner and improve your 1 rep max. As you get better, you have to work to higher percentages of that, and it's not going to move as much. So it's kind of just like expectation setting. So I'm like, I would rather, like you will also probably notice as somebody starts to chase a higher and higher number, their form and technique starts to adjust. They start to reduce the moment arm. Like, so like for like bench press notoriously, like you'll see, or dumbbell bench press, you'll see people's hands start to come in a little bit more, their shoulders start to shrug up a little bit more. So they're doing all these things to leverage the muscles that aren't as fatigued throughout the lift, and basically create a shorter path so that the arm is under the weight faster versus like having to work that pec from out to in is more work.
Hmm.
But it's like if we can keep that consistent, then we know we're actually getting better versus like if you change the form every time, we don't know if you're actually getting better. We know you're moving more weight, but we don't know that the muscles that you're trying to train are actually getting stronger. Um, so standardizing the reps and stuff first is one of the things that I focus on. And then as athletes get stronger and notice that they're not able to go weekly and improve, like one more rep each week or improve tempo, it's like then we start like really being like focusing on technique and and it's more about like just how hard something feels. You're training that special quality of being under load that feels a certain way. So like when you know that something is an RPE 8, that feeling, if I put trash bags over the weights, you wouldn't know what you're holding, but if you just felt and you knew how much effort you were giving there, and I told you I need it to be a 10, and you go until you feel like it's a 10. Um, and if I pull the trash bags off and it was lighter than last week, that doesn't necessarily matter because you're training the quality of training at that intensity. So then when your body is prepared to do the thing at a heavier rate or at a heavier weight, then it will go and you'll be able to do that and you'll be able to keep the form consistent because you know what it's like to operate at that intensity. Some people, they train exclusively at loads that are maybe like 65, 70%. And then the moment they touch something that's like an 80%, they're like, whoa, this is too heavy because you have to try harder. Like you have to like actually like batten down the hatches and like try. And like that for some people is just too much trying. Like, I'm going to poop. Like, they're like, that's too much. So like, but that's the thing is like you're like realizing like how much more you can unlock in terms of like the intensity of that lift. And then just like being like not married to the weights. It's like they don't care, you shouldn't either. Like,
Yeah.
and if
Your
you
muscle.
don't, the more you care about the thing, just doing the things properly, the more it's actually going to go up.
Yeah. I don't remember where I heard, but like your pecs don't know that there's 135 pounds on the bar.
Right.
They just don't. And so the idea of I have to be where the effort is the standard, and so kind of getting used to the idea of like, because now we're getting into an interesting conversation where, because it is internal, like effort, its rate of perceived exertion is what RPE is. Like, how am I perceiving it? And what you talked about there is like our threshold for, I think, I don't know about you, but like my RPE has that scale has grown over the time that I've lifted. Like what I used to think was a 10 is now an 8. Like
Yeah.
I know I have more in the tank, but like it's a little bit of like becoming comfortable with being uncomfortable
Yeah.
for the first time, where you're like, this is hard, like I might poop. Like
Right.
this is really challenging. And
Yeah.
so starting to maybe push the lever of hard into that, But I think
Right.
once you see people do that, I don't know if there's a cooler thing than to watch somebody do something that they didn't think that they could do
Yeah.
and be like, that actually maybe like I survived and I didn't poop. Like
Yeah.
that felt really hard, but like I'm okay.
Yeah. And some people, it's like they think if I try harder, I'm gonna hurt myself,
Okay.
right? So that's like I think that once there's a understanding of like there needs to be a technical proficiency and you need to be able to hold on to that. You need to be able to hold on to that hard, like that hard.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just like do it hard, no, because that's how we end up with like just dog shit form. Like you've seen the classic like kid hunched over, like looks like a dog pooping, trying to pick up a barbell, like that meme.
Mm-hmm.
Like deadlifting like that versus like, okay, I'm deadlifting, my form and technique look good, but now I'm doing it really hard, like giving the same effort as dog shit kid, but at technical proficiency. So it's like once we know you're in a safe space to actually like really, really push. Have you ever tried to like you're getting warmed up and stuff, and then you get to the working weight and you go to pull it, and you're like, well, this is not coming off the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, no, I just need to like try harder.
Yeah.
And then you like really lock it in, and then you pick it up.
Yeah.
It's like the weights didn't get lighter. Like you didn't get stronger. It's just like
You just like reminded yourself that like I have to be paying attention to what I'm doing. You get
exactly
yeah, like I remember the first time that I did that where it was just like, oh, I'm not like I wasn't really ready to do that. Like I
right.
just wasn't paying attention,
I did that
basically.
last week.
Yeah. It's all the time. Or like you lift it up and you're like, why is this feel so heavy? And then you're like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm I think about it like energy leaks. I don't know if you ever like
Yeah.
thought about it like this, like a pipe
Mm.
with a bunch of holes in it, and water's flowing through it. It's like I got to make sure that all my holes are kind of taped up so that I'm
Yep.
not losing stuff and I'm actually putting it all where it's supposed to be.
Right.
And it's usually like I do the worst thing. I don't know. Like you're gonna laugh at me. I can't like unless I'm doing like a really like all right. I'm gonna do like a real lift here. Like I'm gonna try to go up to like 8 or 10 sort of thing. But for most of my sets, I'm like I'm gonna listen to a podcast or something like that. And the other day, I didn't change what song I was listening to, and I'm sure you've actually done the research about like music with working out, but I didn't change what I was listening to, and I know you'll appreciate it because I know you're in the sports, but like remember the NBA, NFL, like NBA guys can't play in the NFL thing from a couple of weeks ago. That was
Mm.
like all over the news. Like some guy comes out and he's like, NFL guys couldn't play in the NBA, and gosh, it was Chris Long. I don't know if you heard this. Chris Long's like rant about this. It was pretty hysterical.
I
But a
don't
guy
think
from
so.
the
No.
NFL comes in and he's just basically like, so he played in the NFL and he's like, listen, you guys fly in private jets. Like I'm sleeping in a queen bed during OTAs with another grown man. Like you would get folded up like a lawn chair sort of thing. Like literally 8-foot table folded in half to a 4-foot table. So he's talking about this and I'm listening to this like rant as I'm doing my heaviest ever dumbbell shoulder press. And he hits a punchline like right as I was going from rep 6 into try to hit rep 7. And I started laughing and I lost it. But it was the moment where I was like,
Yeah.
oh, I can't, like,
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
plugged up here. But it was that moment of like, oh, yeah, I actually have to be paying attention to what I'm doing
Yep.
in order to do something hard. Like, if I'm going to do this
Right.
hard, I can't kind of meander my way through it. It has to be that intentionality of effort.
I've been guilty of actually causing that punchline a few times during the session. Clients like,
Oh,
you
me
can't
too.
do that right now. Yeah.
Yeah. Don't make me laugh. Well, I've done that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Or I'm telling a story. Like, I'm sure you do this where you're like,
Yeah.
you're doing you're like telling a story and then you hit a punchline right as they're doing it. And I'm like, oh, that wasn't safe. That's my fault. That's my bad.
Yeah.
Probably shouldn't have done that. But the idea, though, that you said before I went off on my total tangent there of like, first we have to feel what good form looks like, proper technique looks like. And then, and then almost like, what does improper technique feel like a little bit? Like, and knowing the difference between the two. And then you can start to add load on top of function versus
Yep.
we don't want to add load or weight on top of dysfunction because we're just going to
Right.
further the dysfunction. So
Right.
when, like, obviously you start with people with, hey, all right, we're going to make sure the technique is dialed in. At what point, or like, how do I start to know? You think about like the bench press thing, right? How do I start to know without somebody telling me like form is gone here because I'm
Yeah.
thinking about the weight? Like, how do we know? Hey, we've gone off the rails here.
Um, One, if you like end up hurting something, but I'm not saying that if you do it wrong, you'll automatically get hurt.
Yep.
But if it does hurt, you're probably doing it wrong.
Yeah.
Um, I'd say like obviously given very specific exercises and looking at each person, it might be a little bit different. But you know, if I'm at the bottom of my bench press and the first thing that moves is like my elbows go into what is called abduction or abduction, it's where your elbows would lift further towards your ears. If I'm here and the first thing that happens is I start to flare like that, that'd be like, no, we're not. You should keep tension in your lats. You're not gonna keep tension in your lats if you're abducting. Um, Getting your rhomboids good and tight. So obviously, like it's like if it's uncomfortable, if it starts to feel unstable, if it's unstable, it's definitely probably not the right position. Um, like Jordan Shallow has said, the setup is probably like the best way. Like making sure somebody is set up properly in the exercise determines their execution. So if
Mm-hmm.
we set up well, then we're not likely to have as many issues downstream.
Mm-hmm.
So like really emphasizing that um, foot pressure, hand pressure. Like if I'm doing something um, with my upper body, in order to produce force, we need to be able to internally rotate. If you can't get pressure to the inside of your hand, inside being like thumb side, like as I'm starting to press, probably something going on there, because the hand operates like the foot. Um, the foot needs to be able to press flat into the ground to produce force. Same, same with the hand. So if you're doing push-ups and you're on the outside of your hand, like there's lots of little things, little intricacies. There's just like things that I would avoid generally. Like if I'm doing something that is an intentional shrug and I'm supposed to be targeting like my lats or my chest and or my delts, and my shoulders go straight to my ears, you're probably not doing the right thing. Um, and then like if we're doing anything where we're getting pulled out of position, like if there's a position you intend to be in, and now you're in a position you did not intend to be in as a result of just pushing, I'd say you're losing form.
Well, I think the idea that you said there, that Shallow's idea is like, hey, if we're set up properly, then you're gonna like naturally have like what is the safe, the safer portion of the exercise, usually the eccentric or even like like that's gonna like you're gonna, if you're set up properly, you're gonna have like one direction that's like almost self-explanatory on the way down. It's like,
Yep.
hey, if I do this and everything's kind of tight and locked in, like it's all right, take a deep breath at the top, squeeze down on whatever it is that you're going to do, and then go into whatever it is that you're going to do, and then you just undo what you did. You know what I mean? Like as soon as the things are going, have to move out of that position, it's usually when we end up with trouble. So like even
Right.
thinking about a deadlift, because I think this is one where a lot of people get hurt. I think you and I both had, you deadlift enough for long enough, you probably have a back issue uh, until you realize like what is proper form for a deadlift. Like you do it improperly for a while, and you're like, oh, that's, I've been doing this subtle thing wrong, and it's usually because, all right, I either didn't get into the proper position before I started, or I'm in the proper position and then I lose that position. Like the guy who's doing the hunched over dog pooping deadlift, he might have set up properly, but the second he starts to lift, he loses that position, and that's why he's putting the pressure where it's not meant to be.
Right.
Same thing with a bench press, a row, or whatever it is. If you're set up properly, and then you just keep that setup and then go into the position you're trying to be in and back. But like there's a point A and a point B of every exercise. So if you know where point A is and you know where point B is, and you just stay tight from point A to point B, then you're likely going to not lose it.
Yeah. And like when I'm talking to my clients about like injuries, like we know the basic equation is like when load exceeds tissue tolerance. So basically it's like if the weight that you're using is or the force is stronger than the tissue's tolerance to that, it will likely injure it. So if you've been exercising with good form and technique and these specific set of muscles have been growing in strength and size to an exercise, and then all of a sudden you switch, and now that it's not that the tissue wouldn't like it wouldn't be able to hypertrophy or strengthen in those positions. Like even if you did the dog shit deadlift, you could probably train that up in a way where it could grow strong like that, and that's why you'll be able to see somebody with maybe a bit more of a flex spine while they're doing their deadlift, and it's because they've strengthened those. But if you go from doing it a certain way to then leveraging a new set of tissue that aren't trained or prepared for that level of load or force, you're likely going to experience an injury. So it's not necessarily like there's one way to do an exercise. There are better ways, and there are tissues that aren't going to respond well, like structure, like ligaments and stuff don't respond as well. They don't adapt as quickly as muscle and stuff. So doing things that stress those things out, probably not a good strategy. So if we notice we're loading into positions that would better leverage structure over muscle, then it's probably not the most reliable for long-term strength gain.
100%. We get so the way that just kind of rephrasing that because I love the way that you said that, which is the idea of like you see somebody who's an elite level power lifter, as a for instance, doing a super heavy deadlift with a rounded back. They've been doing a deadlift with a rounded back from all the way down at 135 pounds, and then they did it at 150 pounds and 175 pounds, and they've kind of progressive overloaded their way to do it. Versus you have somebody who's done it with a straight back for forever, and then they kind of overload what they're capable of, and then they kind of round their back a little bit, and now that's the first time that they're deadlifting with a rounded back, and those muscles that are required are now for the very first time trying to take over the load that historically it has not done any of because or much of. It's been whatever, the glutes or the hamstrings or other muscles have been doing more of the heavy lifting, and so it's like that's a giant jump up. That would be the equivalent of like, hey, for my pecs, I'm doing it with proper form, I'm going to jump from 25-pound dumbbells to 100-pound dumbbells. It's like you're probably going to hurt yourself. But where that ends up happening usually is not in the giant muscles, but rather in the smaller ones that are doing what the bigger muscles should be doing, because we have kind of into a position where they have to take over something that they're not ready to take over.
Yeah, I would say that that's more likely the case for most people versus like the extremes of powerlifting and steroid use or something like that.
100%. 100%. All right, I want to wrap up with this, Stephen, because this has been awesome, and it's fun to kind of geek out about this stuff, but hopefully I think it's been really helpful for people. As you think about, because position, right, we talk about like, hey, get yourself set up with a coach and position, and then, hey, set yourself up. So like all of this is worth having somebody teach you proper form for a while, right? But we also talked about like longevity of like, hey, having somebody who's been with you for a bit, like even if they continue to have a coach, like I'm sure you have had different coaches throughout your time. I've had different coaches throughout my time. Like it's still worth doing. So the benefits of coaching in your perspective, long term, past, I think the short term, like initial thing, because I think this is something that a lot of people get into fitness and have some sort of short-term transformational goal, whether it is I want to get my health in check. I want to get, I want to run a marathon. I want to be stronger. I want to look a certain way, whatever it is. And then it's like a tangible goal, but then it's like the rest of my life, like we got to
Mm-hmm.
keep this for the rest of my life. So as you think about coaching from that perspective, the longevity piece of it, where do you kind of put yourself in that position where you're like, hey, we're playing a little bit of a long game here, um, for the idea of like, hey, why do clients? I guess maybe the simplest way to ask this is why do clients stick with you when they've achieved their goal in six
Yeah.
months?
Yeah. I think again, it depends like person to person. But a lot of the times it's like, they're human. They have their goals and goalposts are constantly moving. And maybe it was, the initial transformation, but now it's like, you know, I want to make sure that as I'm aging well. And I would say like from a general, you know, perspective, it's I kind of look at humans, how they should be moving first, and maintaining that. Whereas like some people will lose function, attempting to grow stronger, so they'll lose their access to external rotation and shoulder flexion, which is like the key performance indicator of your shoulder's health, is like how well you can externally rotate it and lift it over your head and maintain that position. And then the opposite at the hip, how well you can internally rotate and extend. You lose access to those two positions, and then everything starts to kind of like crumble from there. So like I put those things first, and I think people just like if they had it. I think a lot of people who had a coach before, they kind of realize like, oh, like this actually works, because like the things that used to pop up for me don't pop up anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So like keeping people in play for longer is, I think, a huge thing. Not getting people hurt, getting people to their results, getting them to realize that it's not a destination, it is a journey, and that it is something that we're looking to do for a lifetime. So like, I don't know if you saw my post. I just did one on cardio where it's like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not doing it to be some sort of hybrid athlete. I'm not doing it for fat loss. I'm not doing it for clout. I'm doing it so I can play with my kids. I'm doing it so that I can see my kids get old. I'm doing it
Mm-hmm.
to enjoy activities that I'm doing. I enjoy, and when those change, that I'm able to do those too.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the same thing for training. It's like, what's the point of all of this if it's just like going to be snap a couple pictures and post them on Instagram? It's like that you have to walk around with this body all the time.
Yeah.
Do you want it to be hurt? Do you want it to be weak? Do you want it to be able to like, like going up a hill? In Seattle, it's like the whole thing is a hill. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's First Hill, Capitol Hill. Like it's all hills. So you're either going down a hill or up a hill. And if you improve your strength relative to your body weight, that becomes easier to do. And so now your life is less taxing, so you have more energy for the things that actually matter. Right? So I look at it all as in perspective too. Like if we grow stronger and more conditioned, everything else becomes easier and we have more energy for it. Don't you want a life where you can be excited and vibrant and bring more to those things, versus if you came exhausted, like I just walked up the hill. Like, dude, the whole
Mm-hmm.
thing's a hill. Like I just walked up the hill and dude, I need to lay on the couch. I'm sorry, babe. If that was it, if that's all you have to give after that, versus if I can come home, the moment I open that door, my son is there and he's like, Dad, jump. He wants to go on the bed and like flip around. And I'm like over there tossing it. Like we go straight there. Like I just drop my bag. We go, I start flipping around. That's the thing. So I want to be able to have energy to do that. And lots of people want to do that. They're not going to go flip their friends around, but like maybe they want to
Yeah.
go hang out with them and do whatever. They have the energy to do that. And so I think like giving people perspective of how the training is impacting their life outside of the gym. Because if they're like, yeah, yeah, my curls are getting better, or oh yeah, I'm like, how is this connecting to your real life? How is this like, whereas like maybe that wasn't the initial value based decision. That's where I'm trying to steer it, is like, how is this making your life better? Not just like, like there's the initial confidence in like my clothes fitting better and stuff like that, which is nice
Yeah.
for sure. but it's not the whole reason to do it.
Yeah. I had a client told me once, he's like, my clothes fit better, which is nice, but I feel better.
Mm,
Like, can get down on the floor and put together chairs and play with my kids and do
yep,
all these things. Or I had a guest on the podcast say this once. Anthony Pluff said, cardio's for the kids. Like, cardio's for the kids. You know what I mean? It's like, and I add, and Molly Galbraith has said this too, but I've kind of adapted it. But like, cardio adds years to your life. Strength training adds life to your years. Like, what are you doing in your day to day? Because want to get, like, the relationship I think a lot of people have with fitness is the short term thing. Like, hey, I want to lose weight, I want to get stronger, build muscle, whatever it
yep,
is, which is all great. But the thing that keeps you coming back, it oftentimes takes you getting the results in order to even think about this. But I just had the conversation with a client earlier today, whose husband just had like a major health scare, and she was like, and it had to do with his colon, and it was something like, she was like, we had been talking about this through the lens of fat loss for so long, and you had also talked to me about health, but I hadn't really thought about, like, what's the value of fiber beyond just it makes me full to keep me in my calorie deficit. You know what I mean? Even though we
mm-hmm,
had talked about it, it wasn't until she had this like real life example of like, oh, fiber actually can save my dang life. You know what I mean? And like, eating protein is actually really, really important for my long term health, and to
yep,
be able to be around for the long term in my day to day. Like, how do I feel? Do I have
yep,
energy? Am I, like, am I able to perform in the day to day things, and not just like, the aesthetic things are great, the physical performance things are cool, like, it's fun to like hit a new PR in the gym, but like, what's more fun is you walk in and you put your bag down and you take your son into the bedroom and you chuck him and flip him around on the bed for a while, or you go on the hike with your friends because they asked you to, and you haven't hiked in a while but you feel confident in your ability to go do it because you're in a state of physical readiness because you train
right.
consistently. Like, that's the real benefit of being in the gym.
I agree 100%.
Yeah, man. Dude, this was so fun. It was great to chat with you. I feel like you and I haven't, I mean, we've messaged back and forth, but like, have a real chat in quite a while. So it was great to have you on. And again, if you're in Seattle, David's Fitness Method, I'll put all of his social stuff and his website down in the show notes for you to check him out. And even if you're not, you should follow Steven, because he's just fantastic strength coach and trainer, and cool dad, and just says like cool stuff online.
You
He's just
said
a cool
enough
dude. Like,
enough nice things about me. It's good. I appreciate it, man. I really
yeah,
thank you for having me on. This is fun.
absolutely, man. I'm hoping to be out there for Lucas thing this fall. I haven't told my wife yet, but
Are
she
you
doesn't
coming to the
listen to the
summit?
podcast. I'm gonna try. I
Okay.
gotta, I gotta
Yeah.
butter my wife up and get her
You
on
got a
the.
couple months to do that.
Yeah, but yeah, if not, we'll certainly send my well wishes. But I'm sure I'll see you out there. But it was awesome to
Cool,
have
man.
you on, and I appreciate it. And everybody, go check out Steven and Davis Fitness Method if you're in Seattle. Appreciate it.
Thanks, man. This was great.